Okay, you should be good now.
Yes, let me bring this in. Open a new tab.
Got it? Okay.
Still spinning.
No, you're here now.
Okay. All right.
Okay, let's shut the phone off. Good day, sir. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, terrific. And I just want to start telling people now a little bit about our background and how we met. Who do I have before me right now?
My name's Robert Bozgoz.
Terrific, Robert. And we've known each other for about a decade or so now, maybe longer, God knows. Uh,
At
you,
least, at least going back to 2018. Maybe longer. My recollection is not as good as it used to be.
there you go. We'll call it close to a decade then. Okay.
That'd be fine.
Now, uh, for the viewers out there, what I want to explain is that this man and his family have been subjected to confiscation of all firearms by the U.S. military and their associated counterparts in the local police force, which is
That's at Fort Meade, Maryland, and it was all military police. Some civilians, some military, but the local police department from Anne Arundel County did not participate.
okay, copy. So now we're in a situation where these guys were confiscated and it was a warrantless search. And as we'll get into this, I don't think there was any predicate that would have granted a perimeter for the military to do this. And in my opinion, they have not adequately addressed it since they've done it. And there's a notice out, a demand for payment for these damages. And there are things that go back through the years. So as you can see on my in the screen share now, we met back when you, as a whistleblower, were undergoing a lot of things. You had a stroke. I believe your brother died of a stroke, and they were putting you through holy hell. We're not even gonna open that can of worms right now because we'll be here all day.
That's
Um,
correct.
but that is you in that hospital bed.
That is me. That is correct.
Okay. And then we went to court, or I went to court with you as an AD advocate, and we won in the sense that Voncelle James had these bogus charges brought up on you guys, and they eventually dismissed them. And I see you with Sue Bozgoz. You're in the middle there, and I forget your friend is on your far left.
That's Miss Millie Daniels. We met
That's
her when I was on active duty years ago.
that's right. She wrote a declaration. I recall that.
Yes.
All right. And then there's you with Sue in the hallway after the dismissal. Okay. So Robert, I'm gonna minimize these. If you could tell us before we go into this, tell us a little bit about. Let me stop the screen share. Tell us,
Excuse me.
tell us a little bit about your background in terms of. Oh, if you know what, if you're not running facial, I'll just put the screen share back up, and you can tell us about your background. Hold on. We could continue
A
talking though. Tell us about how.
little bit of
For
my
those of-
background
yeah,
is I am a former Army judge advocate. I served from 1990 to 1998 and then started a career in government service, culminating with a 17-year period at the Department of Veterans Affairs. And my last duty station was in Washington, D.C., with the Veterans Benefit Administration Office of Client Relations.
I remember all this. Well, not all of it because I wasn't there for the start of it, but that sounds familiar. Great. And just so people understand, judge advocate general, that's an attorney. Okay.
Our
So
Army lawyer in uniform, yes.
there you go. So now then, let's proceed to the 25th of June. I understand that. There's one thing I want to bring up going back to that date. 1 second. If we can, I think we can. We have the technology. I need to find a document going back to the day sometime after we met when you guys had a settlement conference out there. Okay. And that's not the one, but I've got it right here. Is this it right here? Yes. There was a settlement conference back in the day. This letter is from 2019. And whatever
Yeah,
this is. Yeah, yeah.
I
We don't,
don't specifically recall having a settlement conference. There
mhm.
was a indication from the assistant U.S. attorney at the time that they were interested in engaging in settlement, and then shortly thereafter, he went dark and was reassigned. So nothing ever came of that settlement conference.
Right. And then that day in court we just witnessed, I think that was how they kind of dismissed the whole thing. But basically, folks, for listeners, they brought up these trumped up charges saying that the Bozgoz family was trying to threaten Voncelle James and her husband. They were just recording something at their own home, dropping off a service of summons, and that's all it was. And it just got really ridiculous. But anyway, so enough time on that. But it's important for
Right.
people to know
That was
that
the
this.
lawsuit that my wife and son initiated that I later joined in against the Department of Veterans Affairs and the post office that has continued to increase a number of uh, defendants for a good number of years.
Mhm. All right then, sir. So from this point on, why don't we go into now? You were subject to a warrantless raid. Is that correct?
On 25th of June, they had the military police and civilian army police on the installation of Fort Meade do a raid at the house. They demanded that my wife surrender or that we surrender her. They eventually, because we wouldn't open the door, contacted my management company, a company called Corvius Housing, or I don't remember their exact name, Corvius International, and they opened the door, and we're standing in front of a whole group of police in various uniforms, and they're demanding that my wife uh, be relinquished to them.
Yeah, and I know later on down the road, and there's another complaint filed because after that you had been under arrest for like an hour. Then several males proceeded to do the body search, the frisking search on her later when there were females present. That's a whole nother matter, but
Exactly.
listeners should know about that.
Exactly. I thought it was very interesting, Chris, that they grabbed us and put us in handcuffs and then put us in patrol cars and left us there for an extended period of time. And I was wondering what's going on. It's kind of difficult for me to move in that patrol car, and I just kind of lean forward so I can look out the windshield. Next thing I notice, they're pulling firearms that are in locked cases out of it and putting them in one of their patrol vehicles.
Great. That's a good segue to go into the regulations here. You provided me with two different sets of regulations. One, we're going to go through the Fort Hood one real quickly. I'm looking at the cover page. You're looking at the cover page is up here. Okay, but identified right there clearly as Fort Hood Regulation 19011. We scroll down and we don't even need to go further than the third page. And we see here that the applicability is clearly delineated right there. Applies to all military personnel, government employees, and all civilians, including family members who store, possess, or use a weapon on Fort Hood. Okay? Clear as a bell. Now, we'll put that down. Let's come back to the policy over here at Fort Benning, where you were. Read
No,
that for
Fort
us?
Meade.
Fort Meade, rather. No, this is the Meade. Yes. Care to read that opening paragraph for us?
Yes, we'll go ahead and skip beyond the title. All personnel assigned, attached, or present for duty at Fort Meade who reside in residential family quarters or BOQ are required to register their firearm. Do you want me to continue on? Or are we sufficient with that?
We're far enough with that. Now, so let me ask you this question so everybody's clear. At the time that this all went down, were you military personnel or were you civilian?
No, I was civilian. My finished my military service, and I was fully discharged from the reserves of the Army on February 4th of 2004, approximately a little more than 11 years before I signed a lease for the house on Fort Meade.
There you go. So that's all clear. Now, we need to pull up one more thing here. That's not it. Hang on. There we go. Now, there was a statute you just raised, 32 CFR 552.18 administration. And why did you highlight this statute for me?
Well, I highlighted that because I was wondering where the requirements for weapons registration came from. And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, I started doing that the first part of this week, and that was about the time that things started to go down as far as military bases as a regulation. There was one I knew that was applicable. It was called AR 190-11. I don't have the exact title in front of me at the present time, but I never could get access to that. I started making inquiries as soon as we arrived in Georgia back in late June, early July. And I was told that even librarians could not access that for me, that I would actually need to make a request under the Freedom of Information Act to the Department of the Army. But what I found, and this is what you had on screen, which is 32 Code of Federal Regulations 552.18. And this is a requirement that says that the garrison commander or installation commander has a requirement to publish a number of regulations, do a number of things. And subparagraph E states that the installation commander will publish regulations on the registration of privately owned weapons. And then there's some additional information there that's kind of historical documents, but as far as I can tell, that language hasn't changed from when they published it.
Okay. So
can I
hold on right
finish
there
my
then.
point, Chris?
Yeah. Okay.
From when they published it in the Federal Register in, I think it was 1979 or 1980.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so
That's
here,
all
what
I
I was
have,
going to
sir.
ask
Go
you,
ahead.
yeah, oh no, that's fine. So, what I was going to ask you though, counselor, is what if they say that those are regulations, like the ones I just showed that didn't account for the handguns and
Well,
hold on. Here's the Fort Meade. What if here's the Fort Meade? What if she says, "Oh, I did promulgate a policy, and here it is."
well, there's a requirement. If you looked at the page from Fort Hood, there are various languages and procedures that has to go through to be a properly published regulation. And the information pages and the seal and the certificate from the the administrative branch or military personnel at the base where they have come up with that and say this is an actual regulation. This was only
Right.
available at the Fort Meade Directorate of Emergency Services website, or if you purchase a firearm at Fort Meade, they would hand a copy of that to you at the time of purchase.
Exactly. That's what I was looking for. Yeah, I just can't say it myself. Right. And this is one page article here. That's pretty much all that's there. And it's clearly not delineated as applicable to civilians, whereas the other one is. And we saw the statute says that they will, and that you've got may, must, shall, will. Somewhere in that continuum, will is a lot closer to shall than may. So they failed to follow that procedure that would have given you the clarity. I think it was already clear that it didn't apply to you, but whatever the
Well,
case, I'm not here to,
I agree.
yeah.
And one of the points that I would like to make is this military housing initiative where the military took these properties and turned them over to private contractors and came up with, I don't know if it's base by base contracts or what it is, and I don't know how long the period of time is. That
Mhm.
law was published or enacted by the president in 1996. I don't know when the effective date was. It may have been that year or a couple of years down the road. But the requirements that the garrison commander publish these regulations has existed some 16 years beforehand. And
Yes.
if you were to look a little bit further down in the next section of the 32 CFR, there's a copy of a regulation that was done, I think it was 1978, by Fort Stewart and Fort Hunter Army Air Force Base, and it lays out pretty much the requirements, but doesn't talk anything at all about civilians because, well, it's done like 8 years prior to the civilians coming actually to living on the base.
Copy. Okay, let's move into the case law. Now, let's run through a couple examples. I think we more than made our point, but let's start here with the Disaster Discovery Personal Protection Act of 2006. And that act, that was to cover feds were confiscating firearms in the wake of Katrina and disaster recovery, and that law was passed indicating that that's a no-no. So there's that, and here's the cover page from that, again, July 2006. So there's start of a precedent there limiting the federal or government authority to take private firearms. Now, let's move along. I get next to an order, Messerschmitt versus Mueller. Messerschmitt. Now there it is. Melander. SCOTUS case 475 U.S. 2012. Qualified immunity for seizing unrelated evidence, which could be guns. And this underlying thing, they're claiming that Susan was a threat. Your wife was a threat and all this stuff, which was unsubstantiated. But we'll get to that in a minute. But this situation here, the police had a warrant, and there was believed that the person had ties to the Crips gang, things of that nature, right? And so there was some guns confiscated, but there was also a domestic violence order out on that case, okay? So the Ninth Circuit held that the warrant was invalid and that the officers were not entitled to immunity from personal liability, but it didn't work out that way, okay? They got reversed in the Supreme Court, all right? Messerschmitt is a part of a long line of cases that strongly suggest there's a presumption that doubts about qualified immunity cases are to be resolved in the officer's favor, okay? So remember, they went through the lawsuit rigmarole and they got to SCOTUS, but again, there was at least a warrant present. There was a warrant here, which is why they've never answered any of the letters I've sent them on your behalf. Let's go to the third case I found. Another seminal case, Rahimi. I don't have that one pulled up right now, but Rahimi, I might as well find it for the viewers so they can see it real quick, that it exists. So let's say call it fake news.
I believe that was a case from 2004 and involved an individual who, never mind.
I'll tell you. Don't worry. You're right. Except the 4 is right. It was 2024. And Rahimi, again, I'm bringing it up just so people can see that it exists. Zaki Rahimi was his name. He had a violent history. He was assaulting his ex-girlfriend and fired a gun at a bystander at one occasion. All of these things, okay? And Rahimi had a DV order on him, and of course, the court came down saying that you could confiscate these guns. There's a balancing point at which a private citizen can surrender their right to own a firearm. I would hate to ever reach that point, and I don't think I will. But I'm not in any hurry to get there. But yeah. And you would agree that in a situation with domestic violence and things of that nature and a warrant, you would agree that that's okay to confiscate guns.
Oh, I would agree completely. Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. So we're on the same page on that. So
but it does need to be judicial finding as prescribed by the Supreme Court. It's not something that can be done just on a whim.
Correct. Right. It has to be a valid warrant, and the warrant is always subject to attack subsequently. But at least it would cloak the officer with qualified immunity. Anyway, okay. So now let's come to Canaglia versus Strom, 2025. All right. Sorry, 2021. Community caretaking doctrine does not apply to searches of residence. Okay. Now this was a situation where you had a family. You had a family, which was a man and a woman had some disagreements. The guy was somewhat mental, and there's a gun on the table. He had told his wife or girlfriend to just go ahead and shoot him and get it over with. So he may be either suicidal, homicidal, or both. All right, but there's no warrant. So cops come, He says, okay, I'm going to surrender, but my guns stay where they are. And they're like, oh, okay, sir. Okay, Mr. Caniglia. And then the next thing you know, they go in and take his guns. Okay, well, does it work? Even though they had a good faith basis, all these things, and there was actually a threat to imminent bodily injury of some kind, either to him or to her, or outsiders. Court came down and said no. And that's another SCOTUS case. Okay. So you could only do a warrantless search on a vehicle. Because obviously when you're in a car, you're in your private car, but you're out amongst stream of commerce and people and things of that nature. So you can surrender that. Exigent circumstances, blah, blah, blah. And I
Right.
agree,
But
but
Chris,
not in your
isn't that
house.
requirement that they can only do a search of a vehicle incident to arrest? And that's mainly for the purposes of inventorying what's in the vehicle.
Yeah.
But if they
Yeah.
find stuff, they could go out there and use it against the individual.
Yeah, right. And that's another part of that puzzle I mentioned. I didn't specifically mention. There has to already be an underlying thing going on there. Right, of course. Yeah. A valid basis for the arrest or a good faith basis for the arrest, period. Yes, of course. Now we come to the granddaddy, which is the newest one, actually. It's the grandbaby. And let me go off the screen share again so I can show people. Share. All right. Here it is. So first, before we show that, I'm going to show the letter that I wrote to everybody. This is the second letter, actually. There was one earlier than that. But this one's on 24th of July, 21st of July. Demand for any and all firearms confiscated. And I go to Chief Alvarez and the garrison commander Gore. Your bar letters state to us, and I hope you write this as your ADA advocate, you have confiscated 105 firearms from our home in a warrantless search. The predicate for such warrantless search remains unclear. You state, quote, active resistance of authorized law enforcement and possession of 105 unregistered firearms present an unacceptable risk to the maintenance of security, good order, and discipline in the installation, end quote. And then there's a quote where, it reiterates that. But we remain puzzled by this pointedly vague phrase. What was the predicate conduct that constituted active resistance of authorized law enforcement? And when did it happen? Nobody ever provided that to me. It's been months now.
Right. I
You know,
completely.
it,
Well, let's can we just capture that moment for just a second?
mhm.
When they opened the door, my son and I were standing behind a stool that had been against a cabinet there, and they were saying, well, you're interfering with us. At that point, I picked up that stool, moved it about 3 to 4 feet back.
Mhm.
So I'm kind of
Yeah.
more along the line with this cabinet in the entryway, and
Yeah.
that there was plenty of room for anyone to get up the stairs. So they can't say I was blocking because I wasn't even in close to the stairway before, but we moved back, so we were basically pretty much in line with this cabinet, almost to the point of the powder room on that first level of the house.
I still remember your house. I know exactly what you're talking about. And yes, there's plenty of room to access the stairs. If you were at that point, I get it. Yep. All right. Yeah, I do. Okay. So, all right. So we got that clear. They've never, Major Smith has not responded, and that's the elephant in the room. I'm saying, look, if you went in there with a warrantless search, you haven't even identified a predicate offense to me, and now you have these firearms, which again, there was no imminent risk to bodily harm for these firearms anyway. And so, on what basis do you have to do anything other than pay these people for the harms that they've occasioned, not only for this event, but for the things that have happened before in the past? So anyway, yeah, that's a little bit of that. And I cited a couple of cases in there. Um, Gun South, people can read those. Gun South versus Brady, and the importance of due process in taking someone's firearms. Um, so now let's go to the case, which I put after this. This is all online, folks. You can see it on my Facebook page. This is the case that just came out from going, maybe it may wind up at SCOTUS, but this is Northern District of Texas, and Firearms Policy Coalition versus Pam Bondi. And the ban on firearms at the post office was overturned. So I can't think of anything more to say, you know, about this whole thing. You know, that certainly to me, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Why don't you tell me why you think this case relates to your case?
Well, it's along the line of, I guess, protected property. Looking at, I think it was 18 USC 930. I don't remember an exact provision, but it
Hmm.
talks along the line of building in that particular provision. It doesn't talk about actual land itself. It doesn't say that the whole fort itself is the equivalent of the building as defined in that section of the U.S. Code. And one could definitely distinguish between the fact if I carried a firearm into a post office or into the commissary, the PX, etc., or the clinic at Meade, that I could definitely be arrested. But I was in my own home. The firearms were in my own home. Now, one could probably argue if I were stopped going through the gate with firearms, which I had not been, and maybe I'm going out there making stupid risks on my behalf. But I think the argument would be the same that I had before, that these this policy that Fort Meade had didn't apply to me. And
Uh-huh.
unlike, if you look at regulations themselves, they talk about if you see a means to challenge it or procedures, etc., recommended changes and the like. There's nothing about that when it came to thing on Fort Meade.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And
So,
I can tell you from various letters that I've written, Chris,
mhm.
to people in higher positions at the military, even with regard to Colonel Gore, because I had a disagreement and a little bit of exchange of words with an individual who was at the Fort Meade um, automotive shop. They were doing something that was a safety violation. They had a air hose pull across the walkway that everyone has to pass through versus using one that's close to where they were. And the person went out there and gave me a hard time about it. You know, accused me of thinking to the person who is a senior mechanic on the floor. And I wrote to Colonel Gore and suggested that there's a problem here, in that she investigate and consider taking that individual's privileges away from the thing. So if she's not going to respond to me on a simple matter with regard to an exchange of words, I have to admit I didn't feel threatened. I
Mm.
was unhappy about it, and my response was to write a letter. So she's not going to ask me. She's not going to give a darn if I write to her and said, "Oh, by the way, I own firearms, and your people aren't doing anything. Your regulation isn't up to date. You're telling your people that are selling firearms at the installation they have to register them, where it's not comprehensive. It should be comprehensive, because you're putting those poor people who are selling firearms at risk for
Yeah.
giving them bad advice. They're not
Yeah.
lawyers. They're just doing what they're told to do. But
Yeah. So, yeah.
they
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. So yeah, I'm just gonna sum it up. I think the people, we want to keep these short so people actually watch them. I think we're running about 20 minutes now. That's pretty good. Maybe a little longer. That's fine. But the last thing is that, again, the rationale was that post offices are not historically sensitive places like schools, churches, whatever. It's not the same thing as a school. And so that was part of the rationale too. And post offices have existed before the Constitution even existed. Or any amendments existed. So all of these things weighed in factor of saying that you can carry at the post office. So again, everything that I've seen in all my research indicates that they are doing everything wrong in this case to you. And I think they have until October 21st to respond to the 95. Isn't that the how it works? I'm not sure.
Sue has a different understanding of that than I do, and I'm not going to
Hmm.
contradict her publicly, Chris.
All right. No, we're gonna stay on that one. Okay, so let's stand on that. Let's go back to the Stop share, even though you're not there. Hi, Rob. But we've seen what you look like. We know who you are.
Chris.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess that's really about it, brother. Let me go back here for a second. I want to
I
just,
do have
yeah,
one final comment I would like to make, and I
please,
would
please
like you to
do.
chime in after that.
Please
Looking
do.
at all this in retrospect, that people did the garrison commander's bidding to take us in and to lock us up and detain us, but she didn't do her job, which is to publish a regulation that states who everyone that applies as far as a firearms regulation goes. And my position on that is she needs to have charges filed against her for dereliction of duty. And
Hmm.
I'm in the process of penning a letter to go to the installation management commander, and also to his boss, which is the commanding general of the Army Materiel Command. Of course, I won't have that thing completed until after the websites come back up, so I can go out there and get information, etc., as far as their correct mailing addresses. Yeah, I'm sure I have it somewhere, but even if I did have it, it's just going to go in. It's going to get buried under 10,000 pieces of mail and catalogs that no one's ever going to pay any attention to. And I figure, well, let me just wait a little while before I send that in.
Yeah. One more thing too, I want to mention for the folks out there is that you did when you moved onto that campus, you did indeed initially start uh, registering your firearms, not just with the state of
I
Maryland, which
did,
you've
yes,
already done,
Chris.
but you started doing that, and then after about the 40th or 50th one, you're halfway done, and you start looking at the regulation, and you're like, oh wow, well, I don't have to do this.
Well, yes, I read the regulation, gave it a common sense reading of the regulation
Yeah,
using proper dictionary terms, put the lawyer hat on thereafter, and I said, this doesn't apply to me afterwards. But the thing about it is, if you look at that, it's clear. Just simple dictionary reading that how could I be personnel?
right.
I'm
There's no way.
civilian.
There's no way. Exactly. If anything, it's unambiguously clear that you're not included. And again, with the general presumption that is always stated that the general presumption is to be in favor of the Second Amendment. And that's all I've got, folks.
Exactly.
Rob, thanks for joining me today, brother. I'll get this right up today
Thank you, Chris.
for sure. Talk to you soon, guys.
All right. Bye.
Yes. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable.